If you watch this channel, you know I love top 10 lists, but I got to thinking, what's the point of just ranking things when you can organize them into sort of arbitrary categories? In what's probably a regrettable turn of events, I'm going to give you the Urbanist tier list of North American cities, and it's coming up next. This is CityNerd, weekly content on cities and transportation. Viewer-suggested topics, always welcome, particularly when accompanied by cash bribes, and I am cheap, so let's go to this one from viewer SAA, whatever, who makes the following request. Tier list videos are always super popular, such as from the channel Tier Zoo. It'd be fun to see you do an urbanist tier list video of US cities. Are New York and Chicago the two S-tier cities? Where does LA fall? Would be a hit video, I think. Well, I am a fan of hit videos and I am a fan of Tier Zoo, but Tier Zoo kind of commits to the gaming angle of doing a tier list in a way that I just can't. I mean, I have been sort of a gamer in a past life, but I kind of retired from that when Sega pulled the plug on the Dreamcast. RIP. And to be honest, I'm a little skeptical about the value of putting things into tiers when you could just rank them, but I'm not oblivious to the fact that from a certain perspective, top 10 lists are kind of played out, like old school YouTube watch mojo type stuff. So I'm gonna go ahead and embrace the idea if just for today, and yeah, if it's a hit video, maybe I'll make it a recurring feature. So here's what I did. I identified all of the North American cities that are the central city of a metro area that has a population of 2.5 million or more. A bit arbitrary, but that gives me exactly 32 cities to work with, which is a really attractive number. Almost makes me want to make a tournament bracket out of it instead. So if your city isn't mentioned, it just means it's too small and you need to work on getting people to move there. Simple enough. Okay, here are the criteria I looked at to build out these tiers. Walkability, which I created my own index for by mashing up walk score and census data. And I did the same thing for transit and for biking. I also created a separate index for density, which I think is important enough to warrant its own criterion, even though it has a lot of overlap with the other three things. Note that I'm including Mexican cities in this list anyway, just because I want to, even though there's no apples to apples data, so just deal with it. Things I didn't include that you might have: cute architecture, bougie food halls per capita, spatial distribution of hipster coffee shops. These are all important, no doubt, but I only wanted to include stuff I could actually get data for. Besides, I don't know what all of you think urbanism is. It's kind of a subjective question. But for me, it mostly just boils down to how easy is it to live without a car, and how much of a weirdo are you gonna feel like actually doing it? And fair warning, I often look at affordability when I do this kind of analysis, but today I'm leaving it out. So you can decide for yourself what's worth paying for. Okay, that's the setup, so let's get into it. Now, if you're familiar with tier lists, it's kind of a letter grade system with F being the worst. Well, we're talking about US cities here, so I really need a category that's worse than F, and I'm gonna call that category the Sun Belt. In no particular order, allegedly. I've got Tampa, Dallas, Houston, Phoenix, Riverside, Orlando, San Antonio, and Charlotte. Those are your bottom 8, and there is a clear break in the scoring before you get to the next grouping. I don't want to be super negative here because I do try to make this a glasses half full channel, but Dallas and Houston are especially egregious. They're the US's 4th and 5th largest metro areas, and that should correlate somewhat to more transit and walkability per capita, which I think will become clear as we make our way up this list. But these cities are just atrocious across every factor I measured. I do want to give a quick caveat though. As bad as the urbanism of some of these cities is, every single one of them does have good elements or relatively walkable or even transit-oriented neighborhoods. It's just that it's in very limited locations when you'd really want to see it more widely and evenly distributed all over a city. Okay, let's move on to F tier. All these tiers aren't going to be the same size. It just comes down to breakpoints in the data. So I've got 3 cities for you. San Diego, which gets hammered on transit and density. Atlanta, which I feel like is moving in the right direction, but there's just way too much building out instead of up. And Detroit. There's actually probably a whole category of declining Midwest city that used to have more population and be higher on the tier list, and we've just dismantled the things that made it great. I'd love to see Detroit rebound, but man, it is tough. E tier, I've got 5 cities: Puebla, Mexico, St. Louis, Baltimore, Denver, and Los Angeles. All of these feel like they should be better than they are for different reasons. St. Louis and Baltimore are kind of in the Detroit category of they used to have more density and all the things that came with it. Denver just feels like it should be better since it's always on those lists of the healthiest cities. And Los Angeles, I just don't even know where to start. People are still talking about 15-minute cities, I guess. Well, LA is only a 15-minute city if you live in a very limited number of locations. Otherwise, you're getting in your car, and wherever you're going, it's definitely not going to be 15 minutes. For the D tier, I've got 4 cities. Monterey, which has some good urbanism in certain locations and does have grade-separated heavy rail. It's just, a lot of it is really sparse. Portland, which does end up being the #1 bike city on this list, just based on the data I have, and I think that's reasonable. It's just honestly very middle to fair when it comes to things like density and transit. Miami, which it might surprise you it's even this high on the list, but Miami is very different from other Sunbelt cities. In some ways, it's more like a dense Caribbean city than a typical southern US city. And Minneapolis, which rates similar to Portland, excellent on biking, good on walking, but kind of falls down on the other 2 measures. Okay, I've got 12 North American cities left and 4 tiers to cover. But before that, brief timeout so I can request that you click on the various things and just indulge me in a little self-promotion. And this week, that's in the form of promoting Nebula, which I have mentioned previously that I do enjoy the other urbanist creators who are on Nebula, but believe it or not, my tastes do run a bit broader than that. So one thing I enjoy is the Jet Lag series from Wendover, which if you haven't seen, it's kind of like The Amazing Race, but more creative and more fun. Anyway, Jet Lag episodes do drop first on Nebula. But also, if you are a Jet Lag fan, Wendover has some great Nebula originals, and one I really like is the half as interesting Crime Spree series. It turns out this original was actually the pilot season of Jet Lag. So it's where the whole concept originated from, and the pilot season is completely exclusive to Nebula. I'm not even going to tell you exactly what it's about, well, except for it's a reality game show where they break funny laws. But they are laws nonetheless, which maybe explains why it's only on Nebula and not on YouTube, which is kind of the point of Nebula. It gives creators more latitude in the subjects they can tackle and more support for creating more ambitious content. And in the end, it was developed and is owned by us, the creators, which means that when you subscribe to Nebula, you're really supporting us directly, rather than watching whatever ads and algorithm serves you and hoping some of the placement fee makes it back to us. So basically, with Nebula, I've got a direct stake in the success of the platform. For example, if you sign up for Nebula with the link I included down in the description, I do get a percentage, so it's a great way of supporting me directly. And to sweeten the deal, the link does get you Nebula at a pretty good price, just $2.50 a month. That means all the Nebula firsts and Nebula originals, and it also includes Nebula classes, which are fascinating. You really get to go behind the scenes with creators who actually know what they're doing, which has been particularly eye-opening for yours truly. And you really get to see the nuts and bolts of how they do what they do. Honestly, $2.50 a month is kind of a deal for everything you get. And I almost forgot, you know what else is on Nebula? Tier Zoo. Okay, let's go to C tier, and remember, I evaluated all of these as well as I could just on available data. Census, walk score, bike score, transit score, and density, and just looked for natural breaks in the scoring. So I've got 6 cities in C tier. I've got Chicago, I've got Sideways Chicago that pronounces words funny, and I've got East Coast Chicago, and I guarantee you all 3 of these cities are gonna be super annoyed and or switching this video off because they aren't higher on the list. You know what though? The data is just the data, and you don't get extra credit for just having a lot of skyscrapers downtown. This isn't a tall building fetish channel. The other 3 cities are Guadalajara, which I expect to climb this list as it continues to densify and develop its transit network. Montreal, which is kind of just a bit above average across the board. And Seattle, which rates well on walking and biking. And the transit is a work in progress, but there is progress. Just 6 more cities. Let's go to B tier, and I've got 3. Boston, highest walk rating on this whole list, but it comes up a bit short in other categories. DC, very good across the board. I mean, it is funny that it's the nation's capital, but it's also kind of the city you'd be most likely to mistake for a European city. It's just that I feel like there's room for a lot more density. And Vancouver, which has excellent density and fantastic urban amenities in some parts of the city. I mean, Vancouver is an S tier city if you can afford to live in the right place, but it also has a lot of stuff like this. So yeah, it's a B. Okay, let's do A tier, which I take to mean excellent for North America, but just not quite world class. San Francisco, which is strong in every category. Again, I did not include affordability as a criterion just because I talk about that in too many other videos, but it's probably not lost on anyone that the US cities that rate the best on urbanism, or whatever you want to call the criteria I use to put this list together, are pretty much all ruinously expensive places to live. And I've also got Mexico City in A tier. I kind of went into this thinking Mexico City would be an S, but when I pulled the numbers together, it's a bit more sprawling than I wanted to see, and maybe not quite as walkable overall, although there are a lot of very walkable areas. And the transit, in my opinion, is excellent, even by world standards. And that takes us to S tier, which I don't even know what the S stands for. You gamers and tier list aficionados can let me know down in the comments. But it is New York, which has the best, I don't know, character attributes across the board for a North American city. But I'm just telling you, if you put a New York type build on the European or the Asian server, the metagame is all different, and I'm afraid even New York is gonna get overpowered. I mean, Tokyo and Paris are just gonna be scoring critical hits all day. Okay, that was awful, and I'm probably gonna have to chop it in editing. Anyway, New York is great. Is it the greatest city in the world? Pretty debatable, but I would at least listen to the argument. And that is all I got. I expect this is a controversial list if you care about such things. And I did follow where the data led, but I did choose which data to use and how to put it together. And this is a 150,000 subscriber channel now, so with great power comes great responsibility or something. So feel free to let me know where you think I got it wrong down in the comments. I can take the heat. Thanks for watching, and thanks as always to the patrons for keeping me ensconced in a variety of Airbnb locations on the Iberian Peninsula. Still Porto, and I do have a lot to say about Porto, maybe next week. Keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back next Wednesday, and I'll see you then.